right, everybody, welcome back to Hypersensitive. Today I have another really exciting guest this week, and I would love to introduce you to Ash Kilback. Hello, hello.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today.
So happy to have you. I'm gonna do an intro for you and introduce you to everybody so they know who you are. Ash Kilback is an amazing friend of mine. She's an incredible storyteller, writer, poet. In 2016, she founded the Storytellers Club, which is an event series where people came together to listen and tell stories about their lived experiences. After experiencing a grief burnout-related nervous system breakdown in 2019, Ash began healing her nervous system, and that journey has led her to where she is today. Slowly bringing her first poetry collection to life and teaching and writing on the art of paying attention. Welcome, Ash, to the show.
Thank you. I am really looking forward to diving into all things sensitive.
I am too. We're going to dive into entrepreneurship, creativity, and inevitably burnout, which I think many of us experience, especially in today's culture where hustle culture is so glorified, and I have been and continue to be very much a part of that. But we're going to talk about the power of rest. We're going to talk about the power of healing and recognizing where you're at and getting to know what you need. So listening to yourself, and we're going to get into it today. So thank you so much. Let's just start off with where you're from. Tell us a little bit about your life and where you grew up and how you got into all of everything you do. You do so many things.
Yeah, of course. So I am born and raised in Saskatchewan. I grew up in just outside a small town on a farm until I was a teenager, until I was about 17 years old. And then my life turned upside down by way of my parents selling the house and moving just outside of the city. And so I graduated outside of the city of Regina, which I still am at today. And, I think if we talk a little bit about, if you want me to kind of just get right into it in terms of,
Yes, let's just get right into it.
how my story and, those my early beginnings or, the foundations for my life really starting rural roots in the prairies. And my parents were self-taught entrepreneurs. They got married very young in their early 20s, had myself and my sister and my brother. And they were actually in the pig farming business.
Oh my God. I did not know that, actually.
I know that you're going to probably learn tidbits about my life that we haven't even talked about together yet. And so I was a farm girl. I grew up on a farm. We had a pig barn on the first farm that we lived in. And then when my parents moved, just to buy a bigger house, because there was 5 of us, moved on to another farm. And so, my entire childhood growing up was witnessing them really build, their first dream of, having different barns across the province and just making it all, come to life. I have been having lots and lots of conversations with my parents over the last couple of years where I've learned so much just about, I think, that moment in time when we sold the house when I was 17 years old. I remember so vividly to this day. I came home after school and there was this man sitting at our kitchen table. I think he had a red shirt. I remember that he had a really thick mustache, and there was like something immediately where I was like, I don't like this guy. Like, something's up. My spidey senses, my intuitive spidey senses were
you just know.
Were speaking to me. And so he'd kind of left shortly after that, and I had said, who is that man? And my parents had said, well, he's here to appraise the house. And had said, we're gonna have a conversation later with the family. And me being the emotional teenager that I was, I was just like, no, like, I want to know now, like, what's going on. And So they ended up saying, we're getting the house appraised because we have to sell it. And all I remember is I hopped in my car and very dramatically, as like teenagers do,
Oh my God, I
we
was
lived.
so dramatic. I'm still pretty dramatic, but I was really dramatic. I had like no handle on my emotions.
Yeah, you were just like, and it's
Ah,
like you had to
yeah,
like feel like it's like you were like acting in your own like movie during those when like something would happen and you're like, oh, I have to
totally.
just like dramatically play this out. Like my life is over. And like truly my life
Yes.
felt like it was over. So I remember like hopping in my car. Um we were 15 minutes from the valley. So I had driven down to the lake and I remember just like parking my car at like this kind of lookout area and just like crying and like screaming and like shaking the steering wheel and kind of having one of those like, my God, why moments. like I can't believe this is
Uh,
happening to me. My
my
life is
family
over.
home. What the fuck? How did
Yeah.
nobody tell
And
me? There was probably like some trust that it probably felt like your trust is broken with your family because you're pretty close with them, aren't you?
I am.
So for
Yeah.
them not to, for them to spring that on you was probably pretty alarming
And
and
traumatizing
intense.
too, I think, in ways where, when we, when we're young and and our world is the world that we know. And, I'd grown up in small town ever since I was a baby. And so I had friends, I had a high school boyfriend. I knew that I wasn't going to stay. I knew that I was going to
Yeah.
leave. But, it was a very, what's a very like pivotal time, in my, like, in what's the best way to describe it? Like, such a developmental time, right? When you're on that cusp of graduation and
Absolutely.
you're about to, embark onto your journey of adult life. And, when I was so settled in where I was at, comfortable knowing that I was gonna be able to graduate there. So anyways, um, everything changed really quickly. I still remember that it was really hard for me to leave. I had been talking with different families and different friends and saying, maybe I'll just figure out a way to just bill it and just like, finish off my year and a half left of high school that I had.
Yeah.
And so I was, trying to have these conversations with my parents, and I was really stubborn. I think my siblings probably have a very different perspective of me from during
Oh,
that time.
I'm sure.
They had kind of just really didn't put up much of a fight. They were just like, okay, this is, what's happening. And for me, I really put up a fight. And I still remember so vividly this one day, when I was trying to figure out how to stay home for, to finish graduation. And my mom had come down to my bedroom in the basement and she was crying and she was like, you have no idea how hard you're making this. For me to have to be away from your dad right now. And, um, there was so much going on that I didn't know. It was simply, I think that my parents were wanting to make
Right.
a business change. Their parents were also closer to the city. So I think that was part of the decision making, but really it was like, Ash, you're making this impossible. And, of course, then I kind of felt guilty where I'm like, yeah, I'm just being so stubborn and putting up such a fight. And so, of course, I eventually, ended up moving and um, hopped into the middle of my new school in the middle of grade 11. And I went from a class of 25 kids to 160.
It's a huge change.
Yeah, it was wild. It was another world for me. And so, but when I reflect back on, my upbringing, it was very much, those rural roots. I spent a lot of time in nature. I spent a lot of time outside around animals and a lot of time around entrepreneurship, right? So,
Yeah.
it was like our dinner conversations around the table were usually about business. I mean, we were helping mom and dad out on the farm and we were often in the barns and I was witnessing them a lot of the times working, right? And so that was just really how I identified myself, as, when you it's often our parents or the people that are closest to us that become the mirrors, for the way in which we reflect ourselves in the world and our identities of how we go on to
Absolutely.
live, right?
Absolutely. And we either become, you know, replications of them or we become the exact opposite. Sometimes they teach us exactly what to do in life, and sometimes they teach us exactly what not to do.
Hmm.
So it sounds like you, in many ways, took some of your parents' teachings and sort of applied them in your own way in your own life, which we'll get to hear about.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, that was really what led me to going to business school. Was because, of course, like that's the world that I grew up in was entrepreneurship, and it's not that there were never any other. It's my parents were always like, we believe in whatever it is that you want to do.
That's
You
amazing.
you can go, and I think that sense of encouragement and affirmation in what it is that I could do with my life was a really beautiful thing. But at the same time, too, it really like, and I think, like I said, where to me there was no story or no person in my family, in my extended family, even like teachers or any kind of mentors that I had that were really like, there's other things, um, that you can explore, beyond going to business, right? So like a career in art, it's not like it was something that wasn't possible, but it really wasn't a conversation.
Right.
Right? It wasn't like, we've noticed that, you've been writing poetry. When I was 10, I had started, when I was trying to understand myself in the world, and um, trying to make meaning out of things. I was coming to poetry, but it was really short lived because when I became a teenager, I was, pretty much focused on boys,
Yeah. Yeah. As we
and
are.
as we are, and everything else that really really doesn't matter. But and so I naturally just ended up going into business school, and those dreams of writing were kind of just tucked away somewhere for me to find them at another time in my life.
That's interesting. Did it make sense when you look back on it and realize that that's something that's always been a part of you? And that while we sort of go through our teens, that's sort of a time for us to really get to know ourselves. But when we're a kid, we're just so open. We're just like this open conduit for whatever creative, exciting adventure life has for us, and we just are so open to us, whatever we are, and exploring. And then we get a little bit older, and then we start to put all these, like, these veils and all of these challenges in front of us. So did that make sense to you looking back at your childhood?
I mean, we forget who we are, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, I think that's so much of what it means to, be in the full expression of ourselves or come home to ourselves. It's really just remembering. And I mean, I know that there's so many spiritual texts that speak to this as well, right? Where it's just like, we are actually here to just continually remember. And, those earlier invitations or experiences that we have as children, right? I mean, we are the most creative because we haven't been shaped and we haven't been molded in ways where it's just like, this is how I identify.
Yeah, we haven't been labeled and stifled, and we haven't had, uh, enough experience yet to see all of the facades that other people put on, and then we start to wear them ourselves. So you're just like, you're open, you're truly you, and then you start to kind of undo yourself over time, or rather, I guess, sort of dress yourself up and put on a bunch of different masks. And sometimes we're not even sure how we really truly feel or who we really are because we have sort of lost our way.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think that's like the greatest journey of all of our lives. I think in some way there's this universal thread where, I think that's the power of story in itself, right? Is, we were somewhere in our lives, and we were a part of us, or our whole selves in some ways were lost. And then something
Yeah.
happens, by way of either we choose, right, of our own choosing, of saying, I feel so far away from myself, or I no longer want to be this way in the world, and I'm going to choose something else, or life chooses for us, right? And
Yeah.
we get initiated into these experiences, whether that be, trauma or grief or, adventure or, whatever kind of, experiences that we are invited into beyond our own beyond our own knowing and beyond our own control. Is
Absolutely.
what takes that circle back to the very beginning. Um, that asks us, who were you before all of this?
Absolutely. Which leads me to ask you, how was that experience going from being with 25 people to 165 people to then going to a giant university in the city?
Mm-mm. It was a natural process for me when I got into it. I think I have always been somebody that's been able to just find where I fit. It's interesting because internally, I've always had this struggle where I feel like I don't belong anywhere. But in reality, everywhere I've went,
Yeah.
I've belonged. So it's really interesting how we can have these. I think it's called. Walt actually introduced me to this concept. He's my partner and also a very long and dear friend of yours. That's how
Yeah.
he. That's how you and I met.
That's how we met.
And but he talked about this story gap, right? Where it's the story that we're telling ourselves internally versus the story in the way the world sees us. And I would say
Yeah.
that I've struggled greatly with that divide and that distance of how I feel on the inside, how I'm defining or identifying myself in the inside versus how I'm appearing on the outside. And I think a lot of that
Right.
comes from my tendencies and just conditioning that I've been having to unravel around external validation, right?
Yeah.
Of like, how are other people seeing me? Because for a long time that was much more important than how do I see myself, right?
Absolutely. I can identify with that too. I feel like one of my biggest insecurities is having people perceive me the wrong way, or in a way that I don't find desirable. And that's something that is unfortunately totally out of my control. And the thing that I find really hard to wrap my head around is the fact that there is a me and there's a you in every person you meet's eyes, and they're all different versions. And also, different people bring out different parts of you.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I'm like, I want them to just see me for who I am, like all of my parts, all of the parts
Mm-hmm.
of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want them to create a different version. Like I want to be seen for exactly what I am. But that's really hard to define because we are really layered people. Human beings are layered. We say one thing, but we mean another, but we're feeling something else. And then we go
Mm-hmm.
and do another thing. So, I mean, it's really complex and it's hard to define what somebody is when you don't live in their head and their body. And we operate differently around different people in different scenarios, and we change, we evolve as time goes on too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's also learning to, that if we come back to that internal story, or I mean, really that just sense of self knowing and self love, so that when we are out in the world, um, because I know we all have experiences like this, right? Where there's like, there's people we come into company with and they see us,
Yeah,
right? And
feels so good.
that sense of feeling seen and known, sometimes instantaneously. I think it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
I've experienced that myself, with people that have come into my life, and even friends that I've met via the internet, that I've met once in person, and
Yeah.
we feel like we've known each other since we were kids, you know. So there's that sense of feeling seen, but then we also have the experience too, where it's we desire that and we might not receive that from somebody else, and you know being able to come back into ourselves, and if we're I think there's something to be said about just recognizing that maybe this person just we're not for each other, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
But I think also when we don't receive that kind of validation that we're hoping for, and maybe if, especially if it's been in a relationship with somebody where we have been really vulnerable, right? And we've shared so much about our lives, and there's still parts of us that don't feel like we're seen, and that we place so much validation of who we are into those people. And then having to untangle that and come back and saying, it doesn't matter what's happening on the outside, and when I know myself and I love myself as I am, right? Then it doesn't matter that it doesn't matter how somebody perceives me, or what somebody thinks about me, or what somebody says, or how the world lives, beyond me, is because I know myself. I know my place within it.
It's
um
interesting, right? Like there will be times where you start to express a part of yourself that has always been a part of you, and people think that you've changed all of a sudden. You're like, no, I haven't changed. I'm just more confident and comfortable being myself, and I'm exploring this part of myself now. Or I'm exploring something new about myself and showing up in the world and not having to explain that to certain people. People just get it. They're like, yeah, that's so you.
mhm.
Or just, yeah, go for it. I get what you're doing. I get what you're experiencing. And it's, it takes time, and it can be laborious to have to communicate the same things over and over to people. And so when people just get it, it feels so good to be seen.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And so when you're asking me about like those transitionary moments in my life, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately, in feeling like, in my own creative process, in my own inward reflection of just the things that I've been moving through in my life lately, and reminding myself, when we talk about the sense of like remembering who we are, and reflecting back to those really early memories and those moments that were so defining for me, where it's just like, oh, I was just being pulled by the strings of my own spirit. Um,
Yeah.
and I was allowing myself to be expressed. And so one of those things was, I really liked fashion. And
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I still do to this day. It's a bit different from the way in which I initially thought I would have a full-time
I
career
know
in
you,
it.
you dress incredible. It's amazing. You dress so fun, and I love your style.
Oh, thank you. I feel like I'm always inspired by you two to dress more colorfully.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
so,
Thank
and
you.
you and I both are, we're repping color.
We're popping off in color
We
today.
are, yeah. Um, and so, that was like, early on how, of course I came to the page and I wrote poetry, when I was really young. And there was a book called Saskatchewan Young Writers, and I had a poem published in it when I was in grade 6. Um, it's it's funny.
Wow.
It's funny. Like you read back now, and you're like, this was like a terrible poem. Like,
Oh my God. I don't even have to go back that far to realize things that I've done that I'm like, oh my God, that was so cringy. I can't even look at it. I can't even read it. Oh my God. Looking back at my childhood journals, oh my God, the things I would cry about.
yes, but I think too, like, but I think also holding ourselves, and saying that we can laugh, and as adults we can look back and we can see those,
Oh my God,
those
yeah.
earlier
You
expressions,
have
and
to.
just be like, oh, like that was so strange, or that's so silly, or that's,
Yes.
I mean, it's the childlikeness, right? But also I think too, recognizing in between those things, and like even, the poems that I was writing, where I was like, there was such a depth to something else there, though. There was a language that I was already speaking and I was trying to articulate.
Yeah.
The level of sensitivity, of course, we are, you know, our sensitivities are in their fullness when we're children, right? And I think that we can speak to this a bit more today of how we disconnect, and they become dull, or we just
Yeah.
yeah, we block ourselves from them, right? But as children,
Yeah. It's painful. We learn that it's pain. We also learn that it becomes a shield. We start to realize, okay, I need to actually protect myself in this world.
Mm.
When you're a kid, you're like, you're innocent, you're open. You're like, what? I'm not even aware of the challenges in the world yet. And yeah, and then we start to close off as time goes on.
And I remember that too. And so when I was saying, reflecting about this, remembering that it's like, oh, I have always expressed myself and quite freely. But I think when I also reflect in those painful memories is that I was a very hyperactive child. I had crazy amounts of energy. My parents called me the Energizer Bunny because I would just keep going and going and going.
I was the same. I love it.
And just like,
where's that energy now, though? I need some of that.
I know. And I'm trying to harness that same energy.
Yes.
I think a lot of it was very much like a high functioning anxiety energy of just like, I'm feeling everything.
Wow.
I'm feeling everything and I don't know how to articulate what I'm feeling. And so I'm just like bursting with energy. I have a very interesting quirk that kind of speaks to my own relationship with, I think, sensitivity and energy. I get this from my dad, but anytime that I'm really like excited about something, I actually shake. So sometimes I like grab my thumb into my palm and I'll like hold it and I'll like do these little like tremors.
Really?
Yes.
And so you've got to like hold on to yourself, like, and it's just tremors in your hands?
Yes, they're like, well, my whole
you're
body
excited?
is essentially like rushing with energy and I have to like find a way to like ground myself. There's a story that my grade 2 teacher had told my mom that I was sitting in class one day and I was going to a friend's birthday after school. And she said that she kept paying attention to me and she would look over and I would be sitting at my desk and I'd be like looking up at the clock and every couple of seconds I would like go like this. And I would like shake. And she was like, it was like, she was like, it was the most.
That's adorable. It's actually
thing.
Adorable. That's so sweet. It's like you were really embodying this feeling. It sounds like you had a lot of feeling, which makes sense with a lot of the work you do, which is really feeling based.
Yes.
But I mean, you even talk about even being a teenager. I mean, we're all like insane, like sociopaths when we're a teenager. We're like, our brains aren't even fully developed yet. And we're just like expressing and feeling everything and trying things and it failing and it being disastrous. But it sounds like since you were a kid, like you've just been really in touch, like in your body with your feelings.
Yeah. Yes. In the way that when I reflect on these memories and it's just like, oh, I had so much feeling and energy moving through me, right? Like it's like that sensation to me, the way that I describe it now as an adult, and I still do it as an adult to this day. And, it's like I'm like hit by this lightning bolt of energy that like surges through me and I have to find a way to like ground myself into it. Like, I'm like, this is so like intense that I feel like it's like, I have to do these like little tremors. So these like contracts, I have to like contract to like hold it in. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I can visualize that.
Yeah. And so it's a funny little quirk, but it speaks to, I think, just like the energy and the feeling and just like I know that I'm somebody like I'm so highly observant and I'm always paying attention to everything that's in my surroundings and people and energy in rooms and things like that. But for most of my life as a child, right, where I was asked to be small and I was asked to, there were friends of mine whose parents had told my mom, like, Ash is too much. Like, she is like a crazy little kid and, she's too much. She's too hyper. She's too expressive. She's too all of these things. And I think that many of us have, that's where a lot of these wounds, especially, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be related to our creativity, but, whether that's just, speaking up for ourselves in conflict or, just allowing our voices to be heard, in our workplaces or in our families or in our own work, right? Where we've had these very formative experiences when we were young, when we were like bursting full of life,
We
And
were totally okay to be
mhm,
ourselves. And then somebody comes and squashes that. And it's insane that it's adults. It's adults that are supposed to be the ones that are supposed to love, support, protect, be an example. And it's all these people that have shut down their feelings that are telling you as a kid, you should shut down yours.
mhm,
But then wonder why they wake up feeling depressed and anxious and sick and unhappy and stuck. They're looking over at you who's free and roaming and expressing and doing all of the things that I think they unconsciously wish that they could be doing.
mhm,
But then we
mhm,
just squash it. You know, you have to play by the rules and stop talking so much and stop being yourself. And then that's where it all starts.
mhm,
And then we go through life and we're fucked up because of it. And it's like, where do you think that comes from?
mhm,
It
mhm,
comes from these teachers, people's parents, peers, because they're learning the same thing.
mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah.
it causes like a lifetime of pain. And you have to unravel all of that.
Mhm.
It's a lot of work.
It's like your expression and your comfort in being you, and just like freely expressing that, triggers discomfort in me, because I haven't allowed myself that yet. I mean, that's like the shadowed aspect of it, right? And I think that there is more experiences that you will have by by fully expressing yourself. You have the ripple effects matter so much more than those moments of having encounters or relationships or people in your life that might ask for you to stay small and dim because it's uncomfortable, right?
Yeah,
um, but
absolutely.
there's so much more of an impact, and I think not only not only for what that does for our own well-being and ourselves, to allow ourselves that, right? But I mean, that's what the world needs. That's what the world needs more than anything right now, is
Yes.
people remembering that it's like, this is me. This is how I express myself. This is me in my most joyous, radiant energy. This is me and my gifts. This is me and, who I was meant to be on this earth, right?
Exactly. And I guess it begs the question, where do people even begin to feel confident and safe to be able to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably where we struggle a
Mm-hmm.
little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think it's, if I speak a little bit to, my personal experience, and I'll circle back to some of the, earlier stories we were talking about, and, that moment that I came home and I found out that my parents are putting the house up for sale, right? And, it wasn't until years later, actually, it was my my mid-20s, a few years ago, actually, really, that the industry in which my parents were working in, it was very volatile to begin with, but around that 2007, 8, like, it was tanking, and a lot of people
Yeah.
who were really successful in that industry were going bankrupt. And my parents had to sell our house just so that they could because there was, like, the bank was essentially putting a lien on it. And so
Wow.
the only way for them to avoid bankruptcy was to sell the house. And so that was the kind of pressure that they were under. That was really what was actually going on. Is that
Yeah.
they were fighting to just, like, stay alive in this business that they had, bootstrapped from the ground up in their
Oh my God.
20s. And yeah, like, and my parents had three farms across the province. And so, um, I think there's still so much to that story, um, that I maybe don't yet know, but, in every conversation that I'm having with my parents, um, I'm learning more about, like, this was, there was so much struggle and suffering that was
Yeah.
also going on. And um, and I really didn't learn about all of this, until my parents separated 4 years ago. It was kind of a breaking point of them, I think, after years of being in business together and all of the stresses and all of the complexities that come along with, being in marriage and also being in partnership in business, and the wild, wild ride that they had together. And so, when we moved through that experience together, I'll say, like, as a family, but I think also specifically me and my parents, and how, um, when their marriage, when I still vividly remember, the conversations that I had where I, I had found out the reality of what it is that they were going through, and that they had decided to separate. And I think I had a sense that things weren't good, and I knew that they were under a lot of stress with businesses and things like that, but I didn't really know the gravity of all of the inner workings of everything. When we think about, back to that day that I found out that we were selling the house, and there was so much, and I think, of course, our parents, you know do this, right? They either do it based on their, it's what they've learned, it's the generations that they
That's right.
come from, right? Of,
Exactly.
what's talked about.
Yeah.
Whether are we going to tell our kids about really the truth of what's happening? And and when your kids are young, it's like, I think that, I think it's a natural inclination for parents to want to protect their children. And
Absolutely.
this sense of, and maybe the sense of expectation, and they feel as parents, if you have children, and you want them to see the best version of who you are, and, maybe afraid of letting them really see what's happening. And I think that was, there was so much that I didn't know. And I think that in realizing that, and kind of the falling apart of the family, because that's, really what happens, is that when a family falls apart, so does your identity built around it.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if they weren't talking about anything when you were in your teens, when you were a kid, because this happened as an adult, right? Like, this wasn't something that happened when you were a teenager. This happened in adulthood. So it was something that you had to process later in life.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was really, it was life-changing, really. I think when I think about where I was in that moment, and this was really leading up to me having my nervous breakdown in 2019, is that it was all around the 6-month mark where all of this happened. And so we're kind of jumping timelines a little bit, but I was doing the Storytellers Club, and it was really, that was my first entrepreneurial journey. And I think that was always what I was trying to chase, because that was, from the story and the definition of how I had seen success. And it's not necessarily that my parents placed that on me, and they were like, if I placed that on myself, but I think in a reflection of them, right? Where I was like, my worthiness and who I am, and how I will be successful in this life, is mirroring what they did, of being a successful entrepreneur, being somebody who's known here.
Right.
And, very much it was that external validation, right? And I think that sense of, I needed so, so, so desperately to be successful on my own. And not as a way as like, and it, subconsciously having to like prove that to my parents, or just like, and it was all so much of the influence of, how I witnessed them live their lives, right? And so I was, in the very depths of learning about what it means to be an entrepreneur.
Did you base your success off of the appearance of success that you felt your family had? And you were chasing this thing? How did that all unfold?
And so it, of course, unfolded by way of my nervous system completely shutting down. And so I was completely broke. I was, the storytelling shows were beautiful. what you've seen on the outside. And I think that it's, you
Oh,
know,
they were incredible.
they were successful. It started as this idea, where I was in business school. I was going to so many different networking events, and there was that part of me where I was like, I want to talk about the real things. I feel like a lot of us are
Yeah, I get
posturing
that.
here, right? Like,
Yeah.
a lot of us are, we're afraid to allow ourselves to be seen, or we're not talking about the truth of experiences. And, entrepreneurship is a really, really hard thing.
Yeah,
And it
it
makes
is.
you meet yourself, in all different kinds of ways.
Well, it's also, you were saying earlier that you felt that there was never one place you felt you belonged. So it was kind of like you created a circumstance for yourself where you knew you belonged already, and the people came. The people that were on your level, and people that were like you, and people that you resonated with. So it was like you created a scenario that would bring people to you that were your people.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's like, I think that's sometimes our quest for belonging. It's like, I'm going to create something,
Yeah.
that I'm seeing out in the world that I miss and that I want. And that was meaningful connection. It was conversation. It's like I never fared well with like going and just talking about, how's the weather, or like, just tippy
Oh
toeing
my God.
around
I know.
around around
I
life.
can't.
I'm the kind of person where it's like I meet you and I'm just like, what are you learning about yourself lately?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like,
You're like, what are you about? What fucked you up in life?
yeah.
Cool. Do you want to hear about mine? Oh God. Because in some way we're all going through it. And then, you have the facade that everybody's putting on, and it's exhausting. Like, I just want to know who you are, because whoever you really are is way fucking cooler and more interesting than whoever this is that you created for yourself. So take all that shit off, and I want to talk to you, because you're amazing.
Yeah, I know that you have a story, right?
Yeah, everybody has a story.
Yeah. And so that was really, that desire for meaningful connection. And then I had come across The Moth, which is like a legendary storytelling
Yes.
organization of the States. They've been around for like 30 years.
Yeah.
And I started listening to their podcast, and I think I watched some of their YouTube, and I just was like, wow. Like, I was like, this art form and this way of communicating is such a powerful force for opening these doors within us. And I was like, that doesn't exist here. Like, I've never been to a storytelling show before. And so I was like, okay, like I'm gonna try this. And I had the first storytelling show was of course about entrepreneurship, because that's the world that I was living in. It was all about entrepreneurial people, just talking about their entrepreneurial journeys and how they made it to where they were and what they created. And it was in a coffee shop. It was free. There was only room for 50 people, and we packed the coffee shop full.
50 people is enough. That's a lot of people to start out with, too. I
Yeah.
mean, you went from a classroom of 25, and then you just had this crazy idea based on something you had heard of, and then you're filling coffee shops with 50 people just to start.
Yeah.
Like, that's amazing.
And putting a sign on the window and just being like, we're sold out. Like, stay tuned for the next show. I had no idea what the next show was going to be. Like, it was just this thing. I was just operating on
It just took off.
intuitively on a a sense of belonging, really, I think is what really, of course, led me in those early days. And then, over a course of 4 years, it grew to like a full production that was at a venue here called the Artesian. It's an old church that's been renovated into a concert hall. And over 100 people came to the shows, and it was like there was this big stage. And
It's amazing.
and then as I evolved
Incredible.
into the storytelling, it became more about real life, right? It became more about, grief and mental health and, just obstacles that people face. We really, did a deep dive into, what are the most beautiful and the most harrowing experiences that have shaped an individual's life. And that was really what the essence of storytellers became, over those couple years of bringing people together to open our hearts, to each other, to realize, like you were saying before, that we are each other. Valerie Carr is an incredible activist that does the Revolutionary Love Project. And her memoir, See No Stranger, she always talks about how anytime I meet somebody that I don't know, and before I'm about to judge them or before I'm about to make a story, I always say, you are a part of me I have not met yet.
That's gorgeous.
And that's always stuck with me. And that was so much of what storytelling does, right? It opens that doorway, that bridge where, two strangers, can find each other and meet somewhere in the middle and say, wow, we've lived entirely different experiences. But I see me in you here, or I know what that feels like.
Yeah, that no explanation. They just see you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happened from there? Because you were doing the Storytellers Club, and how many years did that go on?
4 years. And yeah, so okay, so that's what's happening on the outside, right? If you were coming to a show and you were experiencing this, it was like, it was a success. And of course I fully feel into that and have such just so much love for that time in my life of what I did, of what I created,
You should feel very proud.
and on such
of
a
yourself.
and such
Incredible.
an
So brave.
intuitive whim. Yes, courageous. Yes, it really was.
Courageous. I like that better.
It really was. But on the outside, it was that way. But in the inside, I was struggling. I was super broke. Like, I was trying to make it as a freelance writer at the same time, doing these storytelling shows. I mean, you really don't make a lot of money on event planning businesses. And there's so much work, and I was doing everything. I had a small team of volunteers. I had a video photo crew that I hired that helped me out. And so, there were people, but I mean, in terms of, bringing everybody into the event, to finding the storytellers,
so many moving pieces,
to workshopping with every storyteller to get them, ready for the stage, to hosting the event itself. And so it was a massive amount of work for one person. And so,
yeah, that sounds like a lot of work.
And then
it sounds like multiple people's jobs.
Yeah. And then
that you were doing as one person.
So it was not only like all of those things, but then I was also holding a lot of space for trauma. Because, when you're working with people's stories and some of the different themes and the different events that I had, there were really, really hard stories. And I think that, it taught me a lot about learning how to listen and how to help people, take what is their most painful lived experiences and tell it in a way that empowers them. And, there was so much that I learned, and just in being in that kind of space and holding that kind of space, and learning how to be gentle and loving and compassionate with people's trauma. And a lot of time people that I it was, of course, people that I had known, but not all of the time. And, I think it speaks to the way in which I was able to hold space for others to feel seen in that way. And that was so much of my intention, right, with storytellers, was allowing people to feel that. And I think that's, of course, what allowed people to come forward and say, I want to share this story. I never shared this, maybe let alone with, family members, but I'm going to tell this story on stage to 100 people.
Yeah.
It's a pretty wild thing, isn't it?
Well, they obviously felt really comfortable and safe with you to be able to do that you could create something where people were willing to be able to tell that part of themselves. Mm. So you're at this point where your parents are going through a divorce. Your idea of success that you grew up with has now fallen away. It's not what it seemed. you're broke, but you're putting on this incredibly successful show. And you're also doing all of the jobs. You are holding space for people and their trauma and their stories. And you're also, doing your own writing. And so all of this, it sounds like it just came to a head. It just was too much.
I
Does that sound
think,
right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I was holding so much space for other people's stories that I wasn't holding space for my own. And I wasn't being
Right.
honest, right? Like, and I think that, but I think I also, when you're in it, you don't really realize how far you're in it. It's funny that, Walt and I were just laying in bed last night talking to each other. And, you can look back on some of these moments in your life and you laugh, right? But we were talking about
Oh,
this
yeah.
apartment that I lived in. You came to that apartment. It was this
Oh, yeah.
dingy, it was
Yeah.
this dingy little apartment that I lived in this like,
I liked it.
I did too at the time, but in a way, like, so we were laughing about it, and like, I had my mattress on the floor because I was also just like going through this phase of like,
Okay, I
I don't want
remember
to lay in
that.
a
Yeah.
bed frame, I want to lay on the floor. But like, I had my mattress on the floor. Like, I didn't really have a proper TV stand. I had like my writing desk was kind of in my living room, and we just like put my TV on my writing desk. But like, you know, there's so much to be said about like, and so we're laughing about this last night, and I just was like, you know, I was actually moving through so much in my internal world. And like, really, that place where I was at, like, even though, and the building itself was like, um, it was, an older historic building, but there was a lot of really heavy, dark energy in the building. And like, even just like when I
Right.
reflect on like how my
I could see
apartment
that.
was, um, at the time, where I'm like, yeah, I was like excited to be in this little like, historic apartment, but
It was a cool place. It was very charming. But yeah, I mean, because it's older, because of the neighborhood, um, it probably has held a lot of people in it, and there's probably a lot of stories there that have been left behind.
but even just the way that I was living, right? Like, I think now, I mean, you can always see it now, right? And so we were like
Yeah, hindsight's
jokingly like
2020.
laughing last night. I was like, wow, like shit, I was really in a dark place. Like, it's like
I was sleeping on the floor. I was broke. I was like fucked up. I'm living in this old, creepy building, but it was amazing. It was a cool building.
like, and when I say broke, I'm saying I was living in like negative 600 overdraft in my bank account. I had $1,000 overdraft that I could ride out. And I, for most of the time, was like negative $500. Like, I was broke, broke,
You're
broke.
like, I have less than $0 right now. I
Yes.
have literally nothing. I owe people money.
Yes. Yeah. And so, like, and so I think it's just like the environment in which I was in, and, where I was at financially, and like, and how all of those things, right? Like, essentially, I was just so swallowed by my expectations, of myself, right? Where I'm like, I had that gap of, you know, on the outside, I was successful. Like, I was putting on these big shows, and I
Exactly.
was doing the entrepreneurial thing and doing
It's
something
not
different,
balancing.
you know.
It's like I'm successful, but it's not matching.
Oh, yeah.
I'm depleted. You can give so much, but in order to give back, you need to help yourself. And you're like, I'm not making enough to even survive right now. So I mean that weighs on you, despite going into storytellers and having such an amazing time and being high on that energy, and then going home and being like, well, I don't have what I need.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not worthy of this. I'm not worthy of
Yeah,
this because, I mean, if people knew really, where I was at in my life, if we were, I mean, I guess measuring my life on indicators of success. I mean, of course, from the outside world, yes. But I think that I just didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe in myself. I was chasing, like I said, I was chasing that identity in which my life had really been shaped by. And, I found a place to belong in that, when I was kind of moving through those questions of what do I want to do with my life, I just kind of had hit this breaking point where I'm like, I was swallowed whole by those expectations that I had for myself. And, I kept saying to myself, I need space. I just need some space to breathe. And, and I hadn't actually really realized the state that my nervous system was in. I knew that I was really stressed. I knew that I was overwhelmed. I knew that I was going through so much inner turmoil on the inside because I was like, feeling like a failure, because of these certain
Yeah.
expectations that I had for myself. I wasn't meeting them. And so it didn't really matter how great the things, how many great things I was doing, or like, even if I had a really successful show, it's just like, I was really not feeling that way in the inside. And so, I think there was a lot of indications over my 20s where like I actually, in my early 20s, I had kind of a similar experience where there was a few kind of big things that were happening in my life. And I was just like, I was at a place where my nervous system was so fragile that I was like, if something happens, I feel like I'm going to explode. Like, and I was so afraid of that. I remember like sitting on my living room, on the living room floor in the first apartment I ever had, Googling therapists and just like crying because I thought my life was going to be over. Like, because I didn't understand what was happening, right? I think it was, when we speak about the way in which we deny these sensitivities of who we are, and we label them as something else, or we disconnect from them, or we tell ourselves a different story, right? Like, I think for me, it was always like, I feel like I have a mental illness, or I'm going to be
Yeah.
diagnosed, or my life is like heading to this trajectory, where, I think my greatest fear was being admitted to the psych ward. And
I felt that. I felt that. You just feel like you lose all connection and all control because you haven't been taking care of this like festering feeling inside. And oftentimes when you're putting in, like you have so much that you're inputting that you don't even realize how fast you're going. And then when you stop for a second, it's like you're dizzy and you're just like, I didn't even notice where I was at. I couldn't even hear my own feelings or what I'm thinking because I've just been so busy and I haven't been paying attention or taking care of myself. And then you just like all of a sudden you're just like you're in it. But you've been in it for a while and you just have to catch up with yourself. And you're just like, I don't know what's going on, but I'm really sick. I'm not well right now. And I've had that fear as well. Is am I going to come back from this, or is this going to be the way that I am
mm,
forever?
mm, yeah, I have felt that on such a deep level, and I think there was so much fear that was consuming me during that time in my early 20s, where I was going on a trip to Mexico with my girlfriends. I was in a really toxic, abusive relationship. And I think there was so many other, probably so many other things, that same, I'm just of ignoring that intuitive voice, or that sense of self that is saying, Ash, pay attention, please. Like, I need you to pay attention to me, and then not paying attention and ignoring, right? And so I was at this like precipice of having a breakdown. I couldn't bring myself to pack for a trip to Mexico. And it was 3 o'clock in the morning that we were supposed to fly out. And I woke up, I had booked a I had booked a therapy session for the first time, and the therapist said to me, "Don't worry. The only thing that can happen to you in Mexico is that you're going to have a panic attack." And to me, I had never had a panic attack. And to me, that meant ending up in a psych ward. Like, to me, that meant like, no, if like, because what is happening in the inside of my being right now, that I feel like if I fully let myself have this experience, it's exactly what you said. I don't know what is on the other side of this experience. And so I'm going to do everything that I possibly can just to keep myself together, so I don't have to let myself live through this because I'm so afraid of. And so this therapist says this to me.
Oh my God, I'm sorry that your therapist said that to you. That's That's wild to me. Don't worry, you'll just have a panic attack. Did they know where you were at this
No,
point?
and I mean, I think I didn't really even,
It's the first time, right? I mean, how do you dive that
I
deep
didn't even have
into
the
your
language for what
life?
I was going through, right? Like I was just like something like I'm so
Right.
fragile. And and so and so of course, like the night before we're supposed to leave for this trip, I have a dream that I have a panic attack on the beach or something.
Oh my God.
And I wake up and I puke in the toilet. And I'm like sitting on the edge of my bed. And my girlfriend calls me and she just was like, Ash, you can do this. Like, you can get on the plane. Like, it's going to be okay. Like, kind of just like walked me through it. And I just, packed really quickly, hopped in the plane. And, for most of the time there, I wasn't actually okay. And I don't, and my girlfriends to this day probably don't know this still. Because it's just like we were in our early, we were like, I was like 24, I think. And, we were still in
Yeah.
university and it's just like we partied a lot. And, so I kind of went to Mexico, we drank a lot, we partied as you do when you go to Mexico. And then I
Mm.
came home and, I managed to keep myself together. I was strangely okay. I think I was strangely okay in the sense that like I was able to just maybe go away and get some sunshine and like, suppress that part of me. Um, you know,
Yeah, and just band-aid it for a second and like go and have some fun and just let go and just laugh and not take life so seriously in that moment and be able to deal with that later.
yeah, and so I just kind of kept on living and then when I was 29, back to the story of storytellers and all this stuff, and I was saying I need some space. I just know that I'm so burnt out and like I can just feel like my nervous system is just fried. Like I just was like I'm coming back to that place again. I'm remembering this feeling in my body. Um I'm remembering this, right? And so
Yeah.
I, of course, moved back home to, so I moved back home to our family house that we had for, the last, I guess over 10 years. That was falling apart too. So this happened around the same time. So I'm here moving in my inner world and meanwhile, my parents are going through their own thing and I'm in the middle of it. And I'm in the middle of it in a way that it's not like it's not the choosing sides of the conflict, but I'm in the middle of it in terms of, holding space back and forth between them just to be somebody that's listening and supporting them. And so I'm holding, such an immense weight as like so many things in my own inner world and really in my
Yeah.
in my life are kind of falling apart. And so I'm having this conversation where I'm like, you know what, I'll be fine. Like I'll be fine once I just get back home. I'll get back home and I'll be okay. And my parents helped me move out of my apartment, and I remember they had a delivery van um, that they like.
I don't know why I'm laughing at that. I'm like, you had a delivery van. This is
Yeah, they had
amazing.
a delivery van because they were in the liquor business at the time, and
They also do so many
yes,
things.
they were doing a million things at that time, which is also speaks to just the that
What you learned.
yes, but the breaking point of everything, that kind of
Yeah.
happened all at once. And so, my parents kind of pack my things of what I had. And I'm sitting like, and it's like it's a delivery van with like two seats in the front. And then obviously it's like the wide open back, right? With all of my stuff. And so like, I'm not actually sitting in a seat. Like this is like, I'm laughing about it. This is how we laugh about things that we've lived through. But like when I look back,
Yeah. At the time,
the
it's not
truth of
funny,
it
but
was
now
like
you're like, this is
really sad.
ridiculous.
And so I'm like
I like sad funny.
sitting with
Yeah.
my legs up in the back of this truck and I just start crying. And it just became to the point where I was just crying uncontrollably. And I lost, and my nervous system just completely shut down. Like it was that fell swoop of like, okay, you're going home and you're going to be safe here to have this experience. And now it's going to happen. And it was just like, boom. And just a split second moment of like, I just completely It fell apart.
Surrendered to the moment.
Mm, yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, it was. And it was really such a dark space too. I went back into that space of, am I going to make myself, am I going to get out of it? You know, it was, I think I had actually, the Course of Miracles actually was something that really pulled me through that. I had been reading a little of Marianne Williamson's work. She wrote a book on the return to love, which is a very simplified version of the Course of Miracles, which is a channeled spiritual text, for anyone that's listening that doesn't know. And she had this lecture that was placing the future in God's hands, something like that. And I listened to that lecture over and over and over again. It was, there's these things that we reach for when we're in darkness. And
Yeah.
and that was it. Like, that was it. She spoke to a lot of the power of the ego and the way in which we become completely lost in our mind, right? Completely disconnected from our body, in our minds. And I spent so much time just listening to that, and just like listening to it and really honestly praying that I would praying that I would make it out alive. Like, it was really like, and I wasn't suicidal or anything like that, but that, like, that kind of darkness space that I was in, though. And I think what I really feared about how we, and shared earlier of, I was on that edge. I was very much on that edge of, am I okay to stay at home, or do I actually need to be admitted to the hospital?
Yeah. Am I ever going to be myself?
Mm,
Am I ever going to feel like myself ever again? Or am I always just going to be in pain? Am I always going to feel? Am I always going to feel like
yeah,
this?
yeah. And you feel like you're not going to get out of it. Like, I think when
Yeah.
you are in those kind of spaces, I remember so clearly too, like, that time was so different. Like, a day felt like a year to me, right? And every day I woke up and I felt that way, and I couldn't control myself, and I would just keep crying. I just was like, this is what life is going to be like for me now. You really do think that you're not going to get out of it.
Yeah. You think that there's no way.
Yeah,
There's no way
yeah,
out. All you can see is the next minute in front of you, and it seems like it's taking too
mm-hmm,
long.
mm-hmm, yeah.
So how did you get here?
So I did go to therapy, and I had a really wonderful therapist. I kind of did a really uh, like a therapy marathon, if you will.
What did that look like?
So just going to a lot of sessions back to back, essentially. So Walt was working. He was working on music in Cyprus, which is a small island in the Mediterranean. So he was gone during this whole experience. He wasn't present. He wasn't. He was across the world when I was going through this. Um,
That's really tough not to have your
it
partner
was
near.
really, it was really, really hard, and I think it was hard because,
Yeah.
um, we were. I guess we were a year into dating, and I think there was still that fear of me where I was like, I don't know what he's going to think of me if he knows really what's happening. If he
Yeah.
saw me right now
I
and he
get
was
that.
present, and I think in a way, um, it was meant to be that way, that I had to go through that myself. Right. And I, of course, was really fortunate that I had friends, and, and I sought out what I needed, and I had a really wonderful therapist. And so I was hopping on a plane. So this happened in May, and I was, I think at the end of June, had a flight booked to go to Cyprus, to go see Walt, and to live there for a month. And so much of, there was a lot of things that I was kind of moving through with my therapist, but she'd really helped me in, encouraging me to get on that flight. I'm also an anxious flyer. I really don't like the idea of being in like a tin can for hours. My life at the mercy of somebody I don't know. It's just like a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
And so, I hopped on a plane. And, I think Cyprus for me was like an eat, pray, love. Like it was my own eat, pray, love because I had, stabilized myself enough. Like I was still so raw. And, I think it really helped in me, taking some time away from family as well because we were going through so much still, arriving on this beautiful island, and where the energy and the lifestyle and everything was all about well-being. Like it was all about slowing down. And I think I've written about this a couple of times, and it was simply like, I'll kind of tell the short version of it was, I knew my life had to change. I knew that there was a reason why I had had that experience because it was a pattern in my life. It was an experience that I dodged multiple times, because I, suppressed myself out of it enough that I didn't have to experience it until life decided for me. It's kind of that necessary dark, that we have to go through. And so, this question kind of followed me throughout Cyprus. That was really like, how do you want to live? Like, how do you want to live now that you've gone through this and, you made it through this. Like you got on a plane for like over 8 hours, you traveled across the world and you're here. And what do I want to be available for on this trip? How do I want this place to really shape who I'm going to become when I get off that plane and I return home again? And it was really about living slower and paying attention. And I think that, for the first time in, I would say, my life, I was present in my body. I was in my body and I was in conversation with the world in a way that I'd never been before, right? There was so many small moments. I'll tell this short story because it was really like what led to, the inner workings of the art of paying attention, which is simply that. It's about, learning to cultivate a life rooted in presence, to be in conversation with the world again. There's so much that I want to say about that, but there was one night Walt and I were on the patio and we were sitting in these white plastic chairs. It was a full moon and it was really beautiful. Like I'd never seen the Milky Way like that in my life. It was like you could reach up and touch the stars kind of thing. And I remember us just like in between conversation, just listening. And, we were listening to like the hum of the air conditioner. And then we were listening to the crickets chirping. He was saying, he's a music guy. So of course he was like, can you hear the beat of the rhythm of the crickets song? So they would like chirp in unison for like 4 counts. And then it would kind of taper off and it wouldn't be in unison and it'd be quiet for a minute. And then it would come back in again and so there was this rhythm. And like even the sound of like the air conditioner and like there was just this moment where it was like, oh, wow, like I've grown up on a farm. I've listened to crickets chirping my entire life. Like I've heard them outside my bedroom window going to sleep as a child. And here, as an adult, years later, I'm hearing them for the first time. And I'm hearing that there is a rhythm to the world, to the universe. Like there is a conversation here. And there is like it's the miraculous mystery of life, right? I'm like, I have never in my life been present for this. And so there was so many moments like that happened on that trip where I was like, I'm coming home and I'm never forgetting this. And I'm going to live my life in this way. And, and all of those things really of, deciding to heal my nervous system, still healing it, of course. I probably will be my whole life, but
yeah, it takes time.
But that coming home into my body and being in conversation with like this sensitivity, the connection to, energies that I have in my own life and the way I am in the world, and being present, ultimately brought me back into poetry, to healing the heart of my artist. and giving myself permission, coming back to that very moment that we talked about at the beginning of remembering who I was. And that when I started paying attention, I started listening to the world, I started listening to myself, and I started to have that conversation with that little Ash that was like, Ash, you've always been a poet. You've always been a writer.
Come back to
You've
what
always
you
been an
know.
artist. And so that was kind of the very beginnings of me saying, I'm gonna heal the heart of my artist too. And I'm gonna give myself permission, and I'm gonna call myself that now, and I'm gonna fully embrace it. That Cyprus has a very, very special place in my heart, and I know that it's a place we probably will visit many times across our lifetime together.
It sounded like exactly what you needed at that time. So you needed to go. And you literally brought that feeling back with you. And you started to incorporate that in what you're working on today, which is the art of paying attention. What is the art of paying attention? Can you tell us
Yeah,
about
of
that?
course. So it is, it's very much just it's a practice, and it's a way of being. I think it's really about learning to slow down. And I think that when we come into, I think it's very much the work of an artist. It's very much the work of a creative. When we are creative beings, when we're artists, our job really is to pay attention, right? We are paying attention to, what's happening in the world. We're paying attention to our surroundings. We're often, very intimate observers of life. That's what makes great art, is that we're able to, look at the way a bird flies, and then we're able to talk about how that makes us feel about our grief. It really is rooted in, my creative journey as well. And I think that as it continues to evolve, speaking more to that the place of how paying attention as artists allows us, supports our creative work, allows us to build a wellspring of inspiration, and to find these small miracles that appear before us, and to bring them into life via whatever art it is that we're creating in the world. But I think too is, this sense of slowing down. And, when I was thinking about our conversation this week, I was thinking about how, for so many of us, we don't even know what it's like to be in the world anymore. Really in the world.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like away from our computers, away from our screens, away from our social media, away from our TVs, away from the stacks of things that we use to distract ourselves, right? To pull us anywhere but
Yeah.
here, right? And, either, as humans, of course, we spend so much of our time either being lost in the past of who we are, or chasing our future instead of being here, what's here in this moment. And, I think that that's, it's a part of why we are the way that we are as a society. I think not only our well-being, our mental health, our physical health, but also just like our interconnectedness to each other. I would ask people listening of, when's the last time that you've gone out in the world, like you've gone out to a park or you've gone out to a coffee shop, and you've just like fully been present with the world. Like you don't have your headphones in, you're not checking your phone, you're simply just out being in the world, and you're watching, children run around in a park or something, or you're watching birds fly above, or birds in the water, or you're just like leaning up against a tree and you're noticing the tree, or you're just closing your eyes and you're just saying, I'm here, and I'm going to listen to the world right now. And it seems like such a simple thing, right? In a way, I think for some people, maybe for many people, it might seem like a strange thing. Ugh, like I don't know how to do that. Like I don't know, because
Why would I go and do that? That sounds
our
boring or
nervous systems
whatever.
are so in overdrive, right? I think that's the reality. I mean,
Yeah.
I only came into this way of being and practice because I had because I had a nervous breakdown. Like I had to.
Life forced you
Yeah.
to slow down
Yes.
and
Yes.
notice. Take note.
Exactly. And I think that, I think for many people, there's probably, if we were to ask, what has caused you to want to slow down in your life, that, people would likely say, like, you know, um, maybe illness or grief or death or, a health challenge or whatever that is, right? Oftentimes we are made to slow down by way of forever living our lives fast, never taking a moment, right? And so it's this simple invitation of making time out of a day. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we sit on a meditation cushion and we close our eyes, right? It's like there are ways, I think for me personally, walking has been one of the most transformative practices. I walk every single day, and I don't take, like, I have my phone obviously with me for safety, um, but I don't listen to anything. And it's simply just like, I'm going to be in the world. And I think that however we find these practices, like however we find these, small moments in our days where we can just say, I'm going to go out in nature, or I'm just going to put my phone down, or like, I'm going to stop checking my emails, or I'm just going to I'm going to consciously choose in this moment or each day to say, like, I'm just going to be present for a moment and I'm going to be in conversation with my life. And in the sense of allowing that to be rest, right? So we've talked about like this sense of these are ways that we rest. And, the truth is we think that the more that we fill our lives with things, the more that we got to make sure that we listen to, we got to read all the personal development books, or we got to listen to all of these podcasts, or like, here's the never ending list of pursuits that I need to be on to be a worthy human being, right? Or to be successful, or to get ahead, whatever the story it is that we tell ourselves, but I have to consume all of these things in order to get here. But I think the invitation that I'm inviting in is this revolutionary act of resting. Is what if I started my day with 15 minutes? This is before, I get my coffee and I check my emails or whatever your routine is. But what if I decided to just like step out on my front porch or back porch? What if I decided to walk around the block, or, even go, every morning, and just with the intention of listening to the world, of just being in the world and being in conversation with life happening around me. And over time, and I'm on a quest to walk every day for a year. I think I'm on like, I've kind of fallen off my journaling. I'm probably like day 230 or something right now.
Wow.
And so I'm coming kind of towards the end of this journey, but of course I'll still keep walking every day. But I can tell you that from doing something like that, and sometimes it's like, and it's not always going to be like, sometimes I have a 10-minute walk and it's not really that great. But sometimes I go for an hour walk and I come back and I'm like, I feel like I've just touched the miracle of life again,
What sounds incredible to be able to, before you even plug yourself into the world, that you just take that first 15 minutes for you to just like get your thoughts, get your feelings, stabilize yourself before turning everything else on, because there's no turning it off as the day goes on. It's like the first 15 minutes of my day is going to be for me and no one else. I need to remember who I am so that I can move through the day in the best way possible. That's brilliant. I need to try that. I need to do that.
Listening, it's like, right? It's like, and it doesn't necessarily, if, I think like obviously being out in nature, I think is so therapeutic and so healing for the nervous system. And of course, I would recommend to anybody for that to be a practice. And I think that's so much of the foundation of the art of paying attention, is also, how my relationship with the natural world has changed because of the way that I walk and the way that I'm present, right? But I think with anything, is that when I feel my inner world feeling really blocked, and if I'm feeling overwhelmed, or, I'm anxious, or I'm depressed, or I'm just like, I'm just not feeling myself, or I'm feeling really off, I always ask myself, how am I not listening? Like, where am I not listening? And I sometimes just write that in my journal as well, where I'll just like, I love to just ask my question. So sometimes like asking the higher self a question, right? Where it's just like, body, like, I feel like I haven't been listening to you for a while. Tell me what it is that I need to hear. Or, oh, okay, well, I realize that I actually haven't gone out for a walk. I haven't gone out for a long walk in a while, and I haven't just like sat on a park bench and let the sun like just shine on my face for a little while, and just like be in the presence of life happening around me. Right? I'm like, oh, I've forgot to listen. I'm not listening. I'm not paying attention. You know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I resonate heavily with that. It's like whenever you have a question, you often already have the answer, but we're always seeking some sort of external something to tell us what we need. But it's like we already know what we need, but we just need to just pause and ask ourselves the question, but also listen, give ourselves the time to receive the response. And yeah, I just think
Yeah.
that's
And the truth
stunning.
too about rest, right, is that I said this to a friend, and I think I've said this so many times, where it's just like, when we allow ourselves space to slow down, and whatever that looks like, we are actually cultivating capacity within our nervous systems, right? And so when we're like, I'm slowing down and I'm allowing myself, right? It doesn't mean that we're going about living leisurely lives, because yes, we're in the world, like shit's expensive. The world's a
We have
crazy
shit to
place.
do.
And
Yep.
yes, like, and I'm not saying that, you know, we of course can still hold on to our ambitious nature, right? But the way in which we can be in relationship with our ambitions and our dreams is, I mean, it's simply like taking care of our bodies and our beings, right? But it's like when we create more space to just be with ourselves and to slow down and to really honestly disconnect, like step away, because I think that's so much of, that's causing so many of, our mental health problems. And just, why so much of the Western world right now is anxious and depressed. It's because we're not actually
Yeah.
living in the world. And so when we allow ourselves to remember the world, to remember the beauty of the world, and to remember how the smallest of moments, when we are present for them, move us. They will move us to a place where we will inevitably be inspired, but we'll also feel so much joy and love, that only increases our capacity to be in the world, and how that also reflects how we are in life, right? It's
Exactly.
like when we cultivate these small practices of solitude and slowing down, you know, and we can go out, if by me going out in the world, sitting on a park bench and watching or listening to the birds for 5 minutes creates this kind of capacity and this kind of love and compassion in me, that when I'm standing in a line in a coffee shop and somebody's really stressed, I can just sit there in a space of presence and just and not rush and not, I think it's just like, because we're in this space of go, 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 right? Show up in this space of being like, I'm here. Like, I'm actually here and fully present and witnessing life wherever I show up in my day, and witnessing. And I've experienced that. Like, I've had so many friends, and you included, that's just been like, oh my gosh, like, you're so calm and you're like so present and you're so peaceful, Ash. Like,
Yes.
uh, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, because I've been working real,
You're like, yeah, I've been
I've been
doing the
working really hard
work.
and paying attention. Um,
Yeah.
because I wasn't like that, for most of my life. I wasn't. I wasn't present. I was always chasing. And so it's this small, small shifts in our attention that really transform who we are and how we are in the world.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like I could listen to you
I
for
feel like we could
hours.
have like a 3-hour podcast conversation together.
I
I was
know.
like,
We
I
could
was
have a
like,
Joe
I
Rogan
know. I
show
was like,
4
what?
hours
I was like,
in and we're
we're. I was
like,
like, what? We're only an
damn.
hour and a half in. Let's keep
I know, and I'm like, I know you have to go, but I'm like, I didn't want to stop you. We'll have to do it
Yeah,
again.
maybe we'll come back for a part two at some point. But it was a really beautiful journey.
Maybe we'll do it in
Yeah.
person when you're here in the
Yes.
summertime.
Yeah.
So
That would be
let's do
amazing.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a piece of advice to everybody: listen, Pay attention.
Mm-hmm. And if you need support in learning how to pay attention, I
Yes, that's
just
what I was leading
relaunched
into.
the Art of Paying Attention. So it is also a Sunday letter that I write with poetry and stories and teachings that helps people slow down. And so I've relaunched it on Substack now. So it's the Art of Paying Attention.substack.com, which I'm sure Chrissy will share in the show notes. I'm Ash Kilback on Instagram. For all of my poetry stuff, I'm in the process of bringing my first collection to life slowly, and so that will be out in the world sometime soon. I'm just letting it have its own life. But yes, this was such a gift to spend this time with you today, and to like just even how this brought us into deeper connection with each other of sharing things that we didn't that we might have not
I
talked about.
know. And there's so much more. I know there's so much more to our stories, isn't there? I kind of like that. I kind of like leaving a bit of our story to
Mm-hmm.
share for later,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
Be
Okay.
well. See you next time. Bye.